By the mid-1950s, the mob had already embedded itself deep inside Hollywood's golden machine. They had their money in productions, leverage over the stars, influence in casting, and control over enough of the unions to keep, or halt, entire studios with a single phone call. But for all their power in Tinseltown, the crime bosses saw it for what it was: a lucrative but incomplete empire. The real money, the real freedom, the real power was in Las Vegas. At the time, Vegas was transforming from a dusty desert pit stop into a neon oasis, fueled by post-war optimism, cheap land, and an anything-goes attitude. The city had just begun its golden age, with mob-backed casinos like the Flamingo, the Sands, and the Desert Inn turning gambling into a high-class pastime. Vegas was everything Hollywood wasn't: cash-heavy, tax-light, and unconstrained by morality clauses or studio gatekeepers. But it also lacked something Hollywood had in abundance: star power. Mob bosses quickly realized that if they could link the two cities, Hollywood and Vegas, they could control the entertainment industry from both ends. Actors and singers would draw crowds to Vegas casinos, and casino profits could flow back into film productions, laundering money and expanding influence on both fronts. It would be a perfect feedback loop: stars promoting casinos, casinos funding films, films boosting the stars, and the stars returning to Vegas for encore performances that kept the money rolling. The blueprint for this double empire was hatched in smoky back rooms, far from the public eye. High-level sit-downs between entertainment figures and mob leaders became more frequent, often under the guise of friendly visits or private parties. In truth, these meetings were negotiations: which stars would play which casinos, which film projects would get funding from casino profits, which studio heads were willing to bend for a cut of Vegas's booming income. It wasn't all theory. By the late 50s, the plan was already in motion. The Sands Hotel became a hub for the Rat Pack, where Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, and Sammy Davis Jr. performed to sold-out rooms packed with high rollers. Behind the scenes, mob-connected casino managers made sure those gigs came with the kind of payouts and perks that stars couldn't refuse. In Hollywood, those same stars began landing prime roles in mob-funded productions, their screen personas feeding directly into their Vegas stage acts. This wasn't just about business. It was about creating a culture where Hollywood and Vegas were two halves of the same glittering, dangerous coin. And for the mob, every bet was stacked in their favor. If Las Vegas was going to become the mob's glittering crown jewel, it needed a palace. That palace would be the Flamingo Hotel, and the man behind it was Benjamin Bugsy Siegel, one of the most notorious and charismatic mobsters of the 20th century. Siegel wasn't like the other gangsters of his era. He had movie star looks, a taste for expensive suits, and a reputation for walking into a room and making everyone stop talking. Born in Brooklyn, he made his bones on the East Coast as an enforcer and racketeer. But by the mid-1940s, he had his sights set on something bigger than loan sharking or bootlegging. He wanted to build an empire that would merge the mob's muscle with Hollywood's glamour, and Las Vegas was the perfect stage. The Flamingo was his vision: a luxury casino hotel in the middle of the Nevada desert, dripping with the kind of elegance that would attract not just gamblers, but Hollywood's elite. He wanted marble floors, crystal chandeliers, high-end restaurants, and a showroom that could host the biggest stars of the day. To make it happen, Siegel poured millions, mob millions, into the project, often going over budget in his quest for perfection. Hollywood was watching. Siegel had connections to the film industry through friendships with actors like George Raft, who was so close to mob circles that his name alone could open or close doors in Tinseltown. Word spread that the Flamingo would be the place to see and be seen, a desert getaway where studio bosses could rub shoulders with mob royalty, and stars could perform for audiences willing to drop thousands at the tables before and after the show. When the Flamingo opened in December 1946, It was billed as the most luxurious resort west of the Mississippi. The guest list for its early weeks read like a studio's dream roster: movie stars, crooners, comedians, and power brokers from both coasts. But the grand opening was plagued with problems. Construction wasn't fully complete, and the early revenue didn't match Siegel's sky-high projections. Still, the Flamingo set a precedent. It proved that Las Vegas could be more than a seedy gambling stop. It could be a playground for the rich, famous, and dangerous. And even though Siegel wouldn't live to see the long-term success of his vision, he was murdered in 1947, likely over the Flamingo's ballooning costs. The model he created would become the mob's blueprint for linking Vegas and Hollywood. From that point on, the desert wasn't just a gambling hub. It was a stage, and the performers came straight from the silver screen. By the time the Flamingo had cemented itself as a fixture of the Las Vegas Strip, Frank Sinatra was already more than just a chart-topping singer. He was an icon. But the mid-1950s found him in a unique position. His film career had revived after his Oscar win for From Here to Eternity, and his voice was as smooth as ever. But the allure of Las Vegas presented him with something Hollywood couldn't offer: total control of the stage, night after night, with the audience hanging on his every note. Sinatra's connection to Las Vegas wasn't a casual booking. It was the result of carefully orchestrated introductions by his friends in organized crime. Men like Sam Giancana, a powerful Chicago mob boss, understood the value Sinatra could bring to their casino showrooms. A Sinatra gig wasn't just entertainment, it was an event. High rollers would fly in, spend thousands at the gaming tables, dine in mob-owned restaurants, and then drop even more money in the lounges after the show. His regular appearances at the Sands Hotel became legendary. The Copa Room, Las Vegas's most glamorous showroom, was his second home. This wasn't the sterile corporate Vegas of today. This was a place where the pit bosses knew your name, where the maitre d' might slip you a better seat if you knew the right people, and where the mob's influence was visible if you knew where to look. The cash from the casino floor flowed freely, and much of it found its way back into ventures in Hollywood, quietly funding films and music projects that helped the mob expand its influence westward. Sinatra wasn't just a headliner. He was part of the show behind the show. His Rat Pack companions, Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr., Joey Bishop, and Peter Lawford, turned their Vegas runs into cultural events. Hollywood and Vegas became interchangeable backdrops for their brand of swagger, jokes, and musical mastery. On stage, they played up the bad boy charm, winking at the whispers about their mob friends. Off stage, they were often seen dining with men whose names appeared regularly in FBI reports. These weren't one-off encounters. Many of the Rat Pack's most iconic gigs were brokered by mob-connected casino executives who knew how to keep stars happy. Luxury suites, high-stakes games on the house, and sometimes even protection from intrusive press or unwanted attention. In return, the stars brought legitimacy, glamour, and oceans of money to the casino's doors. For the mob, Sinatra was proof of concept. If you could bring one of the biggest names in entertainment into your orbit, you could use him as a bridge between Hollywood's glitz and Vegas's gold. And once the Rat Pack made Vegas their playground, the rest of Hollywood's elite started making the trip too. Some for the bright lights, others for the deals that were never written down. By the late 1950s, the mob had something that few legitimate entertainment companies could match: an endless stream of untraceable cash. Vegas casinos brought in mountains of it every night. Some came from honest gambling wins and losses, but a significant portion flowed from skimming operations, loan sharking, and other under-the-table ventures. The problem for the mob wasn't making money. It was making that money look clean. Enter Hollywood. Films, unlike most other businesses, had notoriously flexible accounting. Studios could inflate budgets, underreport profits, and bury expenses under vague line items like production overhead or marketing fees. For the mob, this was a gift. By quietly investing in movies, often through independent production companies or as silent backers, they could funnel dirty cash from the casino floor into legitimate box office revenue. Here's how it worked. A mob-connected investor would put money into a film, either directly or through a friendly producer. The film's budget might list inflated costs for set construction, location rentals, or even actor salaries. In reality, a portion of that expense was mob money being recirculated. When the film earned revenue, that money came back as legitimate profit, complete with studio accounting to back it up. The connection wasn't one way. Sometimes the process ran in reverse. Hollywood money, whether from legitimate studio profits or shady side deals, would be invested into mob-run casinos. These investments were often little more than disguised loans or equity stakes, providing a fresh pool of legitimate-looking funds to expand casino operations or cover up shortfalls. For certain stars and producers, this arrangement was a win-win. They got financing for films that traditional banks wouldn't touch, along with cushy Vegas performance contracts that paid handsomely in cash. In some cases, those Vegas contracts were worth more than their movie salaries. And because the mob valued loyalty above all else, stars who played along found themselves invited to the inner circle, given prime billing, top hotel suites, and immunity from the kind of trouble that could derail a career overnight. It wasn't just small-time operators either. Some of the era's biggest box office hits carried mob fingerprints on their financing. And while audiences were lining up for tickets, no one suspected that the money paying for the film's sweeping love scenes or elaborate action sequences might have started as a stack of chips in a Vegas count room. The beauty of the system was its invisibility. To the outside world, the link between the Las Vegas Strip and Hollywood studio lots was a glamorous exchange of talent and opportunity. But for the mob, it was a perfectly oiled machine, one that kept the cash flowing and their influence growing on both coasts. If Frank Sinatra was the bridge between Hollywood and Las Vegas, the Rat Pack was the full-blown highway. By the early 1960s, the group, Sinatra, Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr., Joey Bishop, and Peter Lawford, had transformed from a loose clique of entertainers into a brand that spanned music, film, and live performance. And the mob couldn't have scripted it better. In Vegas, the Rat Pack's shows at the Sands Hotel became legendary, not just for the music and comedy, but for the sense that you were witnessing something special, something a little dangerous. On stage, they joked about mobsters, politics, and Hollywood gossip, all while sipping drinks and playing up their playboy personas. Off stage, they mingled with high-rolling gamblers, casino bosses, and yes, more than a few men who appeared on FBI watch lists. But the real magic was in how the Rat Pack's Vegas act fed directly into their Hollywood careers. Films like Ocean's 11 weren't just movies, they were extensions of their live shows, dripping with Vegas style and attitude. The movie was shot on location in Las Vegas, with casino exteriors and interiors that doubled as advertisements for the real thing. The plot, a heist set in multiple casinos, played into the fantasy of the Vegas high life while subtly promoting the very venues that mob bosses wanted packed with customers. The cross-pollination was deliberate. Rat Pack movies boosted Vegas tourism, and their Vegas gigs kept their names and the city at the forefront of popular culture. Audiences saw the same charm and swagger on screen that they saw in the Copa Room, blurring the line between character and performer. For the mob, this was branding genius. The stars became living billboards for Las Vegas, their on-screen antics encouraging fans to make the pilgrimage to see them in person. The Rat Pack also provided the mob with a form of cultural camouflage. The association between Vegas and organized crime was an open secret, but the Rat Pack's celebrity glow softened it. If Sinatra and Martin could laugh and drink with these guys, how bad could they be? The image was one of camaraderie and cool, not shakedowns and skimming operations, and the loop kept spinning. Rat Pack movies gave Hollywood product a Vegas shine, Vegas shows gave the casino's Hollywood credibility, and both fed into a money machine that kept the mob's coffers full. By the mid-60s, you couldn't talk about Vegas or Hollywood without mentioning the Rat Pack, and you couldn't talk about the Rat Pack without acknowledging, at least in whispers, the men behind the curtain. Behind the glittering marquees and velvet ropes, some of the most important deals in mid-century show business weren't made in boardrooms or on studio lots. They were hammered out in the private suites of mob-owned resorts. These weren't just after-show parties. At hotels like the Sands, the Desert Inn, and the Riviera, entire floors could be reserved for high-profile guests who happened to be producers, directors, and studio executives. On paper, they were in town to see the shows or scout filming locations. In reality, many were there for quiet, closed-door meetings with casino bosses who doubled as high-ranking mob figures. The agenda was rarely written down. Some sessions revolved around movie financing. A producer might walk in with a half-funded project and walk out with a briefcase full of cash, courtesy of a private investor. Others were about talent booking, ensuring that certain mob-favored performers landed roles in upcoming films, or that popular stars agreed to extended Vegas residencies to keep casino floors buzzing. Then there were the hybrid deals. A film might shoot a pivotal scene in a Vegas casino, guaranteeing screen time for the venue, while also legitimizing it in the public's eyes. In return, the casino would quietly underwrite part of the film's budget, money that often originated from skimming operations or other illicit revenue streams. It was mutually beneficial. The film got funding and an exotic backdrop, and the casino got a permanent piece of Hollywood's marketing machine. Secrecy was paramount. Staff at these resorts were handpicked for loyalty and knew better than to gossip about who was meeting whom in the penthouse. Room service orders came with no questions asked, and security ensured no unwanted photographs or journalists slipped through. Even the guests knew to keep quiet. The unspoken rule was simple: talk outside these walls and you wouldn't be invited back. Some filmmakers openly courted these arrangements. Independent directors, in particular, found mob-backed financing irresistible, especially when the alternative was shelving a project indefinitely. But for every director who willingly shook hands with the underworld, there were others who got pulled in reluctantly, sometimes to settle debts, sometimes to keep their names out of the wrong kind of headlines. These meetings kept the Vegas-Hollywood pipeline flowing smoothly, reinforcing the idea that the two cities were no longer separate entertainment worlds, but two halves of the same empire, an empire built on money, influence, and a shared understanding that the public would only ever see what the mob wanted them to see. By the mid-1960s, the mob's double empire was no longer just about controlling money, it was about controlling the narrative. Las Vegas and Hollywood weren't simply connected, they were fused in the public imagination, thanks to the steady stream of stars moving between casino stages and movie sets. The Rat Pack was the most visible example, but they weren't alone. Singers, comedians, dancers, and actors all cycled through the Vegas-Hollywood pipeline, each playing their part in the mob's grand design. The brilliance of this setup was how invisible it seemed to the casual observer. Tourists saw nothing more than glittering lights, celebrity smiles, and the illusion of spontaneous fun. Moviegoers believed they were watching entertainment that was pure art and talent, not realizing that casting decisions, filming locations, and even plot lines could be influenced by men who never appeared in the credits. Meanwhile, the flow of money between the two cities had become so seamless that it was nearly impossible to track. Casino cash-funded films, film profits found their way into casino expansions, and every transaction left just enough plausible deniability to keep federal investigators guessing. The FBI suspected the scope of the operation, but without hard evidence, they were chasing shadows. More importantly, the cultural takeover gave the mob something that money alone couldn't buy: legitimacy. If America's most beloved entertainers were laughing, singing, and shaking hands with mob-connected casino bosses, how bad could those men really be? The mob had embedded itself in the very fabric of American pop culture, rewriting its image from a feared criminal syndicate to a group of colorful characters who just happened to own the most glamorous playground in the country. But this carefully balanced empire was about to face a new kind of pressure. Changes in labor unions, shifts in public taste, and a renewed push from federal agencies threatened to crack the facade. And the first tremors of that shakeup came from inside Hollywood itself, where the mob's control over labor unions and backstage crews would turn into its most aggressive weapon yet, tomorrow. How the mob used labor unions to blackmail Hollywood. We'll expose the men who turned strikes into shakedowns, the deals made to keep cameras rolling, and the studio bosses who discovered that their biggest threat wasn't bad reviews. It was a phone call from a union leader they couldn't afford to ignore.